Welcome to a special edition of Hauler Talk. I am NASCAR's Mike Forde, joined as always with my friend, colleague, co-host Amanda Ellis. How you doing, Amanda?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Forde?
And also back in studio, my good friend, NASCAR.com writer, NBCSports.com writer, Nate Ryan. Nate, welcome back.
Good morning, Forde. Good to be here.
And we are joined by a very special guest today. It is new NASCAR Commissioner Steve Phelps. Steve, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, Forde. It's great to be here with you guys.
Okay, so first thing I want to sort of clear up, I guess, and Nate has some history, if we will. First commissioner, ... of its kind. So there was some social media traffic yesterday. Well, NASCAR had some commissioners, but the NASCAR commissioners back in the day really dealt with appeals panels and rules and regulations.
I can help you out a little bit here, Forde.
Help me out.
It was known as the Stock Car Racing Commissioner.
Perfect.
And Charles Strang, God rest his soul, was the most recent one, and his time ended in 2008. And at the time, I think they were primarily tasked with hearing appeals. He was like the final appeals officer when a team appealed a penalty. So that was what we knew as the commissioner through 2008, and then there wasn't really one for the last 17 years, and now we have Steve Phelps, NASCAR commissioner, who is not in that stock car racing commissioner role. This is a completely different role.
I'm not part of the appeals process.
That was my first question. Are you hearing final appeals?
I'm not hearing final appeals. That's not what the new job is going to entail.
We'd have a good record if you did, I have a feeling, though.
No comment. Is this where we're going?
So Steve, that is a good springboard to this question of, in this moment of time for NASCAR, why is it important for there to be a commissioner? And what do you look forward to in this role? How do you see this role developing?
I think, I think for a portion of this is optics, right? So if you think about other sports have commissioners. There's some CEOs, but most have commissioners, and the role typically is the CEO of a sport. How we are governed is different than stick and ball sports, and we've talked about that a lot, right? And so Roger Goodell has 32 owners that essentially are his owners, right? And they entrust him to run the sport. And it's a closed system. Ours is different, right? Ours is lots of different stakeholders that are part of it. And, the governing part of that and my role is really of governing our company, right? So NASCAR. The broader role really is making sure that the rest of our stakeholder group understands the direction that we're taking the sport, and then how they participate in as part of that. So it's a different role. And I guess the question is why? Why now? Why this role? I think it provides some different opportunities for us as a sport that will elevate the sport. Is it a nice thing for me personally? Of course. I'm humbled and honored to be the first
commissioner
of its kind. Thank you for that, Nate. I'll use that. Do I have to footnote you by saying that?
No, of course.
Okay, I'm just checking.
I said that first.
So I think,
yes,
thank you.
You have to 10 cents every time you say it.
But I do think, I think it'll be good for our sport, and I think will give us additional opportunities as we are looking to expand the reach of the sport.
Yeah, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think optics is a big part of it. And I just speaking from a communication standpoint, obviously you're going to continue to be the visionary that you've been since becoming president in 2018 and beyond, and do that 3 to 5 to 10 year planning. But selfishly, from like me and Amanda's, and Nate can speak to this too, when we're going out to the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference or South by Southwest or any of these conferences, sports or otherwise, people know when they hear the term sports commissioner, that is a commonly used reference. And I think it'll just be more clear to them and easier for us to say, hey, we have our sports commissioner, we NASCAR Commissioner Steve Phelps, and they'll be like, oh, I know that role. That is a massively important role for the sport. So I think you'll see, I think it helps us get into the ecosystem transcendent ecosystem more than it ever has before.
It sounds to me like rebranding playoffs.
Right.
Throw that out there. That happened
Sure.
a few years ago, and it sounds like a similar path.
Yeah, I think I just think it's an opportunity for us.
Yeah.
And I think it'll bear fruit. The role itself isn't changing significantly, and Steve O'Donnell's role is not changing significantly. It's more kind of defining those roles, and I think finding titles that are commensurate with what we each are doing. And I'm excited about where we're going. I really am.
So when we look at your timeline, 2018 is when you became the president of NASCAR. But 2020 really feels like a moment in time where, your leadership was really shown, but also just a time in our sport where not only was it important from the NASCAR side, but the team side and everyone having to work together. Looking back, that's 5 years from essentially the time that we're in right now, which is really crazy to think about. But do you reflect on that time often of kind of where our sport was, a year ago and where we are now, and even where you are in the role that you're in?
Yeah, I think the pandemic was hard. I have said this previously, but I think as the calendar flipped to January of 2020, January 1st of 2020, we were 60 days into merging two companies, International Speedway Corporation, which was a public company, and NASCAR, which is a private company. So we were taking ISC private. And based on what happened in the pandemic, it was actually a really good thing that we did that. It allowed us to be able to be far more nimble as we were trying to get our schedule back and get back to racing, that we didn't have to go through a public company and do the checks and balances that were part of that entity. But then, mid-March happened. Friday, we were unloading trucks in Atlanta, and so I remember having conversations with Jim and Lisa, and I said, "Listen, we have to shut down. We are literally the last sport." The NBA had shut down 2 days earlier, and just massive shutdowns on that Thursday for sports, and it was our turn. And I had to call Marcus Smith, who was actually vacationing, and say, "Hey, this is at your facility. Just want to let you know that we're packing up all the competitors and everyone's going home." And then from that moment until May 18th, when we raced at Darlington, it was just a difficult time trying to figure out how we could get back to racing. And our goal, and it was a stated goal, I said it to my senior people, I believe we have an opportunity to be the first sport back. And because of that, we can actually change the perception of the brand, right? Mm-hmm. Change how people think about NASCAR that are not in NASCAR, right?
Yeah.
And so we worked with Goodyear, we worked with our teams, we worked with facilities, we worked with an entire industry to get back. And I am proud to say that we were the first major sport back to competing. And that was a big day. I will never forget May 18th. The importance for our industry to be the first back, I think it was important. I really do. And I do think that our sport, when things are really hard, we do things really well. And that is when the sport's at its best when it comes together, which is why I push for collaboration every chance I get, because we're just better together than we are apart. And that was the single best example of that. And then welcoming race fans back initially at Miami, Talladega, and then watching the footprint of those fans and the number of fans coming back responsibly. And we were proud of that. We were the first major sport to compete in front of fans. And I think I think it speaks to the ability of our industry to do special things. And then I think it was really cool. We had lots of new fans who wanted to, kick the tires, yeah. Right? They want to come on out. Like I remember in Miami, Alvin Kamara came and he's like, "I want to check out this NASCAR thing." Now Ivan's a massive fan, right? We saw him in Miami a couple weeks
and he
ago.
brought several football
And he
players
brought
with him. Yeah.
8 football players, very large humans, who we spent some time with, and they had a ball. And it's exposing our sport to different audiences. It's no different, honestly, than my 5-year-old self. My dad takes me to a short track, right? I was exposed to it, and I loved it. And that's going to a racetrack's a really cool place to get your fan on, if you will.
Yeah.
When you say, Steve, that it changed the perception that people had of NASCAR, that you guys were able to come out of the pandemic first and race and have fans and do things ahead of other sports, is that the way it changed the perception? That do you think, like, nationally, for people who weren't familiar with NASCAR, they didn't think of it as being a forward-thinking, proactive? Is that sort?
I think so.
How did you see that manifest, I guess?
No, I think that's exactly right. I remember that week, and specifically that weekend, I had 4 or 5 texts from commissioners of other sports that said, "We are rooting for you." And
the weekend heading into Darlington.
Into Darlington. And for the first time, I actually believed them. Because usually that's not how that plays. Oh, I'm rooting for you. Like, no, I'm not. I hope you're ready to stink. But it was important, right? Us showing sports, entertainment, getting back to, think back to it. There was a dearth of anything. How many reruns can you watch, for heaven's sakes, right? And I think it signaled to the country that, you know what, we're back. We're back as a country. And I think we're the tip of the spear for that. And I'm very proud of what our industry accomplished, not what we accomplished at NASCAR, what we as an industry accomplished. And, it took a village. It wasn't one person doing one thing. It was lots of people doing extraordinary things. The number of governors that we called, that was a lot. And each one was different. Some were really easy, like, the governor of South Carolina. He was terrific. Like, come on, we can't wait to have you back. And others were very measured about how we would go back. Governor Sununu at New Hampshire was very cautious. And I called Governor Scott, Vermont, and I said, "Can you call Governor Sununu and see if he can help us?" And he said yes, and he did. Harder, Governor Whitmer in Michigan, cautious, and I don't, I'm not saying that was a bad thing or the wrong thing. It was just different by state, and we had to massage our way into it and make sure that each governor felt that when we were going to their state, that we were going to do what we said we were going to do, and we did. And I think that was important.
So it sounds as if, based on those actions, Steve, and hearing from other commissioners, I'm sure from NFL, MLB, NBA, whoever those commissioners may be that you heard from, it sounds as if you were already acting in that sort of role that they play for those sports during the pandemic. And when I want to revisit this decision to make you commissioner, like, how did that originate? Did it sort of come out of that? Was it a realization for you or for Jim France or Lisa France Kennedy that, like, hey, we need to be doing this now? This is a role we need. Yeah,
it's interesting. As I'm reflecting right now, I'm trying to figure out the first time that actually came up. And I know the first person that said it wasn't me, wasn't Jim, wasn't Lisa. It was Steve O'Donnell. And he said, "You should be our commissioner. That should be a title that you have." I'm like, "Well, we don't have a commissioner. It's not what we do." And it's funny reflecting on that. And then it was something I did advance to Jim and Lisa, and they're like, "Yeah, that makes sense to us," which was great. I think when you have 77 years of history and you don't have whatever this commissioner is and its role, it's different. I appreciate them understanding the change. And, we had a little celebration in Daytona yesterday afternoon, and Lisa talked about the importance of the change and what it means for our sport. And I was struck by her words, and I thought they were really prophetic. And we'll see whether they are. But I was really pleased with how she articulated the why, and it meant a lot to me personally.
when you look at the commissioner role, it's very competition heavy. If you look at other sports, I should say, during the state of the sport, we now have you and Steve O'Donnell together for good reasons that we can get into a little bit later too, just your relationship. But when you have Roger Goodell and he does his state of the sport prior to the Super Bowl, when you have Rob Manfred do any interviews, it's very competition focused of new rules in Major League Baseball, and Roger Goodell is new rules and officiating and things like that in the National Football League. But since you came aboard in 2018 as president, I feel like, in your previous answer, you hit on it. Collaboration is key, and you let your leaders lead, and you rely on Steve O'Donnell's and John Probst's of the world in the competition side. Do you feel any pressure to lean more into competition in this role, or are you pretty much going to have the same philosophy that you have since 2018?
Yeah, I think it's the same philosophy for it. I would say this. I'll push back a little bit on your statement about Roger or Rob or Adam being involved in competition. They may be the ones that are articulating that, right? Mm-hmm. Or letting people know there are changes, but there's a competition committee. I would be surprised if they sat on those competition. I could be completely wrong. But as the leaders of those sport, they're certainly going to let people know, hey, these are the changes that we're making, right? On an annual basis. And I think, to me, distancing myself or even Steve from, the officiating side of the business, I think is important. I think it's important for us to have a neutral position in that. It's not that we're not supporting our people. Of course we're supporting our people. And it's not that we are not, consulted and asked for our opinion about these things. We are. There'll be probably some things that'll come out today, and will Steve and I be not just informed but ask our opinion? Yeah, we will. But I think it's important to have, like, when I go to the tower every race. I do nothing there. Literally nothing there. I just,
you
encourage
support,
people.
Though.
I provide support.
You give everyone support. You say hello. You
Get
you
coffee
encourage
for
them.
juice on
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah.
But I do think it's my role at a racetrack, at least in the competition side, is probably as limited as should we postpone this race or not, from a rain perspective or whatever that might be. And the answer is yes. Again, it's not that there are not times when my opinion is not asked. Of course it is. But I don't think that, Roger Goodell or Adam or Rob they're not on the field or on the court making decisions. And I think that's what it should be for our senior leaders that are not in the competition area. And I think having to be objective about that, I think is important to create a neutrality so all the competitors feel like, we are that group that is governing that particular race, that they're going to get a fair look without a thumb on the scale. Now, I know that's different, right? And I've heard from a number of people about, hey, Bill Jr. did this or Mike Helton did that. And I think, I understand it's a different time. But I think that's the point. It is a different time, right? It is a different sport. And I think it's important that, that the people who have the most knowledge in this space are given the freedom to govern, the race or officiate the race as they see fit. And I would say this, officiating specifically, if there's a person that has higher integrity than Elton Sawyer, I don't know who it is. And I would suggest that him being in that role, I would put him up against anyone. And any time he makes a decision or that group makes a decision, they are doing what they believe either in the moment or a day or two later, what they believe is in the best interest of the sport in the garage. I believe that. And I think if you asked a Rick Hendrick or you ask a Joe Gibbs or you ask some of these other folks, do you believe that NASCAR is officiating with integrity and with a fairness? I think to a person, they would say yes. I believe that. It doesn't mean we're always going to get it right, because we won't. There is human error in everything. And I think it's important that, every competitor knows when they go to the racetrack that it's going to be officiated fairly.
Okay, one quick follow-up, and I know the other side of the table here has questions, so I apologize for being the journalist dominating this, but I just want to follow up really quickly on the why. Like you said, Lisa mentioned that there's
Sure.
a why for this, and that Steve O'Donnell said we need a commissioner.
Sure.
Briefly, can you summarize what is the why for the commissioner?
I think the why is what we had talked about initially, Nate, which is really, it's a time that our sport has experienced growth, right? So we had a time when we had some significant declines. But since 2019, we are a sport that looks different, that feels different. And if you're in this sport, it feels good right now, right? Competition is amazing. The ratings are strong. We've got new media partners. There are lots of, charter values are soaring. You've got wind at our back. Okay, now what, right? And I think that's really what it was, which is, okay, whether it's international or it's just the opportunities that will be afforded to us with my elevation, right? Mike had said the Sloan Analytics Conference, which I've spoken at a couple of times, but it's more than that, right? I can't get into it yesterday, but I spoke to a major head of a sports media company, and he said, we want you to be an honoree of I can't get into it, but there's the other two honorees who I can't get into either, and I'm not even sure when I'm bringing up this thing, because it's like,
it's
okay.
all good. We can read the room on that. It's all good.
But it said, I don't think that would have happened but for the announcement yesterday. Maybe it did, and maybe that was already in the works. But those are the types of things that will put our sport, that will have us be, shoulder to shoulder with every other major sport, which, by the way, I believe we are. But it's within, I would say, the media and sports arena. I think we're given that, we're looked at that way, right? That we are shoulder to shoulder with Major League Baseball, the NHL, Major League Soccer, the PGA Tour. Obviously the NFL is in a different zip code, fine. But I think that's not insignificant as people's perception of our sport change. And what I'm talking about there is I think people still have this idea that our fan base is old and white. And we have lots of
redneck.
And we have lots of people that I'm a Vermont redneck, so I can say that. But we are, I'm old and white. And I'm proud of the old and white and redneck fans that we have.
Absolutely.
But we've got fans all over the country and all over the world, and many of them do not look like me. If you consider that most of our new fans in the past 3 years are female, they're younger, and they're people of color, I think that's a good thing. Not because I don't want old white men. I do. I want everyone, right? I'm a pig like that. I just want as many fans as we can have. I want to grow this sport. We have an amazing sport. And to me, we deserve what everyone else has as well, which is the opportunity to bring fans to our sport. And I think we've worked hard to make sure that, the gates are flung wide open so people can come and they can feel part of it, right? It's a great community. You go to a racetrack and walk around the infield, camping, people are cooking, and someone comes up and, hey, grab a hot dog or grab whatever. I mean, that's what our sport's about. It's a community, right?
The atmosphere is truly, I think, like, if you've never been, I totally respect you don't understand.
Sure.
But the atmosphere inside of an infield is something that it's like a family reunion, but the people who are celebrating together don't really know each other unless they've joined in the camping experience multiple years in a row,
That's right.
and they make friends. But a lot of times they're all there and they have never met one another. But for those 3 to 4 days, they're the closest, kin around when it comes to their fandom of the sport. And to your point, hot dogs, hamburgers, beer, all the things.
All the things.
You mentioned how Bill Sr. and Bill Jr. used to do things, but and it's certainly a different sport now. But I had the privilege of sitting in on your interview with Adam Stern, who broke the news in Sports Message Journal yesterday, and you said something that I found interesting in that he asked you, "Are you going to throttle back in your race attendance?" And you said, "No, the opposite. You and or Steve O'Donnell will be at every single race." With
lots of overlap for it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to make it sound like, hey, we got 38 races. I'm going to go to 19. He's going to go to 19. That's not the case.
Right.
So, it's fine. Usually it's the first 65 days of the year, there's not a day off. And that's okay. And we love this sport. I love going to a racetrack. It makes me feel comfortable. It's a great place to be. And people who are thrilled to be there, and I'm one of them. So I know there's a question here.
Well, yeah, no. I received a text message from a media member yesterday, and she was very happy for you. And what I love about Steve is that I always see him on the grid, walking up and down the grid, saying hello to people, and I think that just that FaceTime makes people feel comfortable that there is a leader that is present. Is that why you feel it necessary that you and or Steve or both are at the racetrack every week? Is there a philosophy there, or is it just because I love being there and I want to be there?
Well, I think it's both for it. I do think there's, the competitors are there every week, right? And they're working all week too, whether drivers and commitments that they have or, folks at the shop. I mean, it's a lot, and we have a long season, and we're cognizant of that. And we're certainly not going to be adding races to the schedule. Because it's a long season.
Yeah.
And we're trying to figure out the best way as we think about our schedule moving forward. How do we think about the industry and what can we do to the industry? We are tied into 38 races over the next 7 years. So that can't change. So what can change? Do we insert an additional off weekend? What does that look like? When would it be? What is the most opportune thing for us to do that for the industry? But, to me, I know it's a bit, I think people probably snicker that I go to the back of the grid to the front of the grid in all this series every time at a racetrack and wish the competitors, all of them, not just the drivers, good luck on that day. I think it's important. I think it's important to be seen. I think it's important, that they understand it's heartfelt, that I want them to do the best they can today and put on a great show. Have other people done that previously? I have no idea. But what I do know is I've heard from lots of competitors that they appreciate that I do that. I think it's a very simple thing to do. I enjoy it. There's usually some fun banter that goes with that, with the drivers mostly. But, I being at a racetrack's a really special and a privilege to be there.
You touched on some things there, Steve, about actions that you might be interested in taking in the future. So what's the number one item on your agenda now as commissioner and to tackle? And as an offshoot of that, what's the biggest challenge, do you think, facing NASCAR?
I actually think it's the same thing. I think the most important thing for us is the continued rush towards collaboration with our industry. And whether you're talking about racetracks that we don't own, or you're talking about teams, or you're talking about drivers, it is important that we come together as one. And we are at a competitive disadvantage, right? Because we don't own ourselves, right? We, as an entity, right? We are not a league. But in my opinion, the more we act like a league, the better it will be for all stakeholders. Not just for NASCAR, the company, but NASCAR, the sport. Because, as I said earlier, we are stronger together than we are apart. So to me, that is the number one thing in my job that is the most critical.
Get everybody to pull the rope in the same direction.
Absolutely. And conversely, what's the biggest threat? That we don't. Listen, there are macroeconomic things that are outside of our control. You can't worry about those. So we'll adapt to whatever it is, whether it's a recession or a pandemic or whatever that's going to be. We've done it before. We'll do it again. But to me, it's like, what things can you control, right? Through relationships that you have, through, cajoling or whatever it might be that brings people together, and show them in the short term, maybe this isn't in your best interest or our best interest as a company, but long term, it is going to be what's in the best interest of everyone. And I know that people who work at NASCAR, they are sick of me talking about collaboration. They are. It is like,
as a media member, I got to plead guilty here. I've heard it a few times from you.
Yes, and I don't think it's. And I'm going to continue with the mantra, and I'm going to continue with the mantra because it's true. It is really important that we do this right. And so, did I hear from lots of stakeholders yesterday with this news? I did, and it was humbling, truly. But I think that this is we have a moment in time, right, with new media partners, with the bulk of the charters extended. It is time to come together. Now, what I would say is, whether you're talking about the driver ambassador program, and I think the success that's shown early on, or you're talking about different things that we're doing with our race teams, that the race teams are like, oh, NASCAR says they want to partner with us. I actually believe that's a thing. I believe that's a truism. And, we have to continue to double our efforts. What I've said to my people is, we are going to show this industry that we want to partner with them. Full stop. And that's exactly what each department is trying to do to the best of his or her ability.
But I think it's interesting you said, comparative to other professional sports, there are kind of limits to how much of a league you can be, despite all the consolidation you guys have done in recent years of bringing all the tracks in-house. There's still sort of inherent obstacles there to what you guys can do in terms of working collectively? Is that always going to be that way, do you feel like? Or?
Well, I'm hoping not. Listen, I think the facts are the facts, right? They own themselves, and we don't own the broader garage. With that said, I do think there's so many reasons why it makes sense for race teams, drivers, Marcus Smith and the folks at Speedway Motorsports to come together for growth. And we'll just talk about financial, right? So we've just started the first of 5 media deals for 7 years, right? If I'm a race team and I'm getting the bulk of that money, and they are, I would suggest that it would probably make sense for me personally as a race team to support what the broader industry needs to do to make sure ratings stay strong, or that we're growing them, or that the sport is growing. I would say that, money is a pretty strong motivator. And it's not all about the money, but it's important, right? Because it feeds a lot of mouths. So media money feeds a lot of mouths. I do think that it's important that if you're a race team, that we figure out how, and I think this is happening, sponsorship's coming back to race teams, right? There are lots of teams that are sold out, and that helps everyone. The more teams that are sold out, the better it is for those teams that are not, obviously, and the better it is for the Xfinity Series and the Craftsman Truck Series, because money will flow. It'll flow down. Because what happened is, when it started to dry, it all went up, right? It all went to Cup, and so Xfinity and trucks got left behind. And now I think it's changing. So if sponsorship continues to be important to race teams, and it is, we want to make sure that we are fanning the flames on whatever that's going to be. And a lot of that has to do with growth, right? So everyone wins when we grow. And I know that sounds overly simplistic, and it's like, well, of course. So why work against each other when we can work together that will be accretive to everybody?
I want to shift to talk about drivers for a minute. You mentioned when you're at the track, you go down pit road to kind of, say hello or wish good luck to whoever you might see. When you took the role in 2018, I think it's fair to say that, our ecosystem looks a lot different today than it did in 2018, right? How has your relationship with drivers, changed over that time? But then also, or how has it shaped your decision making, I think is maybe a better way to frame that. And then, I think it's always a unique thing. Something that I've observed over the last several years is in our sport specifically, drivers, competitors, to a degree, owners, all the above, have the ability to, and I mean, I think it's true for crew members too. I mean, all of those things could fall into the same category. They have a lot of freedom in what they're allowed to say. And most of the time it's critical. I don't mean this wrong. A lot of people aren't out here saying like, I love all the things, that NASCAR's doing. But there is an element where they have been allowed, to say things about you, say things about Steve, say things about other people in our company. And to a degree, you allow them to have their thoughts and opinions and allow them to do that. And so that's one of the questions is like, how do you process that? But then also, when do you know it's time to make a phone call to say like, hey, it sounds like we need to have a conversation so that we can get closer on the same page? How do you navigate that between competitors and just the reality of like, not trying to control them, but also have an open ear when you feel like you need to have one?
Yeah, I think that I would say that my relationship with drivers has, it continues to evolve. Mm-hmm. But there's like a pipeline of new drivers all the time.
Yeah.
And so getting to know who those drivers are and what motivates them, I think is important. I will attend many of the driver advisory councils because I want to hear what they have to say, or the driver all meetings that we have. Sometimes I address them. Most of the time I do not. Mm-hmm. So I'll either do an opening or close, or I'll do nothing except listen. And I think it's important to listen. They are the stars of this sport. They are. And the more successful they are in building their own brands, and the success they have on the racetrack, it'll fuel the success of the sport. I think as you were asking the question, Amanda, I thought back to a very difficult situation in 2022 where the drivers felt like the next-gen car didn't have the safety features in it that it needed to have, and specifically that the rear of the car was too stiff, and that there wasn't enough give in it when they were backing into the wall or whatever it would be, even bumping it like a Talladega. And so we took that to heart, but there was a driver who very publicly called me out in a driver's meeting, and my reaction to that was, I'm fine with you having an opinion about where things are if you are taking the time to understand what it is we're doing. Mm-hmm. And this driver didn't do that. And so he and I went to lunch that week. And that particular driver, from that moment on, was the best spokesperson for NASCAR and its journey on safety with that next-gen car. And he would call out other drivers. Don't complain. Be part of the solution, because it's a hard thing. If you make a change to the car, the one thing you're solving for might compromise something else.
Right.
That car was designed initially to make sure there was not a catastrophic issue.
Yeah.
Right. And so, is the three things that car was supposed to do. One, it was supposed to increase the safety of the drivers. Right. So if you think about Joey Logano at Talladega and Bubba coming into the roof of his car, right, and crushing it. Joey called me that night, and he had some very harsh words, as he should. So we certainly, in that particular car, which was in 21, stiffened what would happen when we went to Super Speedway before the next-gen car. But the next-gen car was designed to make sure that around that driver that they were going to be as safe as possible. So safety first. The second piece was raceability. And I think the car has proven that it's a great race car to drive, or it puts on great racing. I'll
Great
change
finishes.
that.
Lots of close finishes last year.
Lots of close finishes. And lots of different winners since we've had it, right?
Yeah.
19, 15, 18
last year. Yeah.
It's terrific. So, and we keep iterating on it. We'll say that. Never. It's the old adage: safety is never done, right?
Yeah.
Neither is better racing.
Right.
So we'll just keep digging on both of those. And the third was cost reduction. So Roger Penske said to me last year, "Hey, we've had a 40% reduction in our costs with this next gen car." Great. That's what we want. We want all three of those things to happen. But back to your question, with this particular driver on safety, it was important, and we have to listen to our drivers. They have a big, they have a big microphone, right, or a megaphone, and we want to make sure that they're being heard. But we need to push back when what is being said is not true, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's in lots of things people look through their own lens and come to their own conclusion that is in their own self-interest. We have to look at it through all the drivers' lenses and all the teams' lenses to make sure that we are not advantaging one and disadvantaging someone else. And I think that's an important thing. But I do think the driver ambassador program is designed to drive, drivers' visibility, drivers' personality. And this facility that we sit in, that we built, that was $60 million.
Yeah.
We do that for live event production, and we do it for content creation to make sure drivers are being exposed, that drivers can show their personalities, and the unique storytelling opportunities that we have as a sport.
I don't know if you coined driver star power, but that's another one like collaboration I've heard from you a lot over the years. And speaking of the driver ambassador program, Steve, obviously that's sort of designed, I think, to emphasize that. And for people who don't know about it, it essentially incentivizes drivers to promote NASCAR, to do interviews, to reach out to the media. They're rewarded for that. What's your goal and vision for that? And do you think it can benefit not just drivers but NASCAR as a whole? Like, how do you see that unfolding?
Yeah, listen, I think that the answer to that is yes. I'll come up with something other than driver star power. We'll call it.
I'm not
driver
not disparaging driver star power. I like the term. It's kind of catchy.
But I do think, we want. It's both. If the drivers are successful and this program is successful at driving unique opportunities where drivers can take the helmets off and people can see them for who they are, or frankly, it's many things. It's like short form media, right? It's interviews. It's the Netflix show or things on Amazon, different content that's created that shows a very thirsty NASCAR fan base what they want, which is more of the personalities that drive this sport forward, whether those are drivers, crew chiefs, owners, whatever it might be. And I think this particular program we're going to have a lot of success. I mean, you think about the number of earned media hits that we have had this year versus last year, it's up significantly. And all of that says to me that, hey, that's working, right? At least that particular metric. What happens with, over time with the building of driver brands? And that's really what we're talking about. So I think back in the day, right, it was, you think about, Petty and Pearson, Yarborough, or then into, Earnhardt and Gordon and then that, Stewart and, Carl Edwards and Dale Jr. and all those folks that made NASCAR what it was. It was driver personality and it was rivalries. And so for us, that's what we're trying to get to, right? Because I think drivers have a lot of demands on their time now. So we're trying to incentivize the drivers to want to build their own brands. And I think that's what this program does. We will monitor the success of the program based on, things like Q scores and based on, how people are thinking about, about the brand. And everyone benefits from this, Nate. So does the driver benefit? Yes. Does NASCAR benefit broadly? Yes. Do the teams benefit for increased visibility for sponsors and their teams? Yes. The whole sport is elevated. It's kind of like the, tide lifting all boats, right? That's what the program is designed to do. And I think, again, whatever this word that I won't use, collaboration, whatever this new word is about coming together, right? It's an industry coming together that benefits the entire industry, not just one entity or, a group that is in an entity, right? Like race teams or drivers or tracks. We are in sport. Everything is about the community of NASCAR. And we are a different community, as we've talked about earlier. I think, and when I came over here from the NFL, I was so struck by the community itself. And a lot of that has to do with the nature of competing every week in different facilities, right? So if you're a stick and ball sport, you play one other team on that particular day. And then in the NFL's case, you may not play that team for 4 more years. If you have a fight this week or a disagreement, we'll say, that disagreement will carry over to next week, right? So when we go to Darlington, and maybe Darlington's a little different because of the speeds that you're running at, right? But
Bristol's
what
right
happens at Bristol?
Yeah.
Bristol's right around the corner, right?
Yep.
I don't know, and I'm not suggesting that.
Well, there's also
those things. Self-policing. Does it work? Does it not work? I'm not going to comment on that. I know lots of people have lots of opinions about, what happened, on Saturday in particular. To me, it's an unfortunate situation. It's kind of heat of the moment. It's winning at all costs, and that is tough, right? And I do think that, you hear veteran drivers all the time say, these kids just don't know how to drive, right? They don't have any respect for each other. They don't have respect for me. They should, make sure that they are, minding their P's and Q's. So, and pay respect as I've earned it. And I think that's true to some degree. I also think that people are there to compete and to win. So there's a balance there. And when a driver crosses the line, then we are going to step in and make sure that, we do what's necessary in order to get order on the track and in the garage. Did
Saturday's Xfinity race put NASCAR in a bad light overall, do you feel like?
I don't think it was a great light, personally. I know it sounds ridiculous. I won't speak for the sport.
I'm afraid you have to now with this new role. Sorry.
I do think that, in my opinion, the initial contact, right, with Sammy and the 54, okay. And then the 54, I think, did an elegant job of moving him, which I think that was the payback, right? Do I think Sammy, him coming from 2 car lengths back and charging Taylor, to me, I thought it was watching, in the moment, it was unfortunate.
I want to go back to that meeting with said driver about the safety of the car. As painful as that period of time was for NASCAR, communication standpoint, I do think that is...
As painful as it was for Mike Forde.
Well,
this is really a podcast about Mike Forde.
Yeah, let's talk about me. Enough about you, Steve. What do you think about me?
How about I start asking the questions for you?
I do think that was a moment in time that really helped collaboration, for one, and I think it helped sort of your stature in a way. And I was in that meeting, and I remember that one driver mentioned what he mentioned, and you stepped up. And I think what's important in this industry a lot is, I always say this, is like, if you have strong self-awareness, it'll get you far. And I think you did in that moment, and you said, hey, here's where we messed up. When Kurt had his concussion, we should have met with you guys the next day or the next weekend at worst, and we didn't. And this was in Charlotte Motor Speedway in October, and you said, you vowed that's not going to happen ever again. We're going to meet every single week, or every single quarter at least, maybe every single month. And we have you've kept that promise, and we've met with the drivers as a whole large group, at least every quarter, maybe every other month. So my question is, that was an emotionally charged meeting. I remember it was not a back and forth discussion. It was hot. But you remain cool, and that is sort of now your persona. It's always been your persona in my eyes, and I want to know how you remain cool. Is that something that your parents brought you up? Is that something you realized early in your career that I can't get hot in this moment because it's not going to end well? Is it a learned behavior, nature versus nurture? How do you remain the Steve Phelps, the cool, calm, and collected leader that you are?
Well, I'll go back to that meeting, and then I'll answer your question. The meeting was emotionally charged. I think the drivers had some real concerns that we needed to address. And if you remember, Forde, we met every week for the rest of the year.
That's right. Yep.
But I will say this, said driver.
I feel like we gave enough context clues. Actually, we know who this is, but
yeah, it was Kevin Harvick. But starting in Vegas that weekend, Kevin was squarely in NASCAR's corner because he saw what it is that we were trying to accomplish for the safety of the drivers, and I appreciated that from him. And it was important to have that veteran leadership, his leadership specifically in that moment, to call out drivers who, by the way, weren't coming to the meetings. Like, if you want to complain about stuff, then you better come to the meeting and hear what the hell is going on. And it's a lot easier when
he wanted penalties if you didn't show up too.
Right. I think that was, but the meeting itself, we had employees that were working their tails off, like John Padillac and John Probst, who care about the safety of the drivers. It's John Padillac's entire job is to make sure, these cars are safe so our drivers don't get hurt. And, to see them get emotional was really hard for me as a leader. And so when they were called out and then I was called out, you have to, you stay cool in the moment because that's what you should do. I think that the position, it's something that I've always been. I try to always stay, cool under fire. That was an important moment, but it was important to stand up and, in my opinion, set the record straight. And has it had a great result for us? It did. The back of the car was softened. The front of the car was softened without compromising the integrity of, what's happened where the driver was. Improvements to the head surround, improvements to the seat. It is a journey that is constant. And I think if sensors, mouse sensors, we are constantly iterating to make sure that the driver stays safe. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud of what our people at our R&D facility do right down the street. They're the unsung heroes. They are. And I think if you would ask our drivers today, do those people down the street care about us as individuals and as drivers? I think to a driver, they're going to say yes. I could be wrong, but I don't think so.
But in those, so going back to the how do you keep cool? I didn't want to ask the question. No, I'm always fascinated because I would lose my mind often when you get pushed, and I've never seen you lose your mind. At least not behind.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I think maybe because we obviously have been a part of meetings that you've been a part of, like that are also internal. I think the thing that with Steve is he stays calm and cool and collective when needed, but you have a very, you have the ability to lead when you need to. And it's an understanding of, like, when Steve means business, we know you mean business, but you still have the ability to do it in a way that still brings forward kind of that calm demeanor that allows you to do that. And I just want to take a moment, because it kind of fits in the conversation, to say that I will be honest, there have been times where there have been people who have said things about y'all that I think is just incredibly unfair. But I have to remind myself that they don't have the chance to necessarily work with you in the way that we do at times.
I think that the position, or our position as the sanctioning body, is going to come with lots of opinion, right? And lots of emotion. So if I'm a race fan, like, I didn't go to X yesterday, but I was told that there's lots of colorful things said about me, which is fine. You have to have thick skin.
Yeah.
But I do think what I would say about emotion's hard, right? And when it's all about winning, and it is about winning, then impediments to winning are not often looked at favorably. So I don't know any other way to say that. And then, people are going to have their own opinions, and particularly fans.
Yeah.
And I love that. I want fans to voice their opinions about what they think is right. I know that people don't think we listen to fans. We listen to fans all the time.
Absolutely.
Right? We have a fan council that we go to regularly. I think the difficulty, and I've said this before, is that let's just say we have 100 fans. Can you make all 100 happy? You can't, right? They're going to be at odds just with each other, right? And driver A and driver B and team A and team B, and how they compete on the racetrack. Because that's really what it is. Or, hey, if I'm a fan of, mile and a half racetracks, and I don't want to go to short tracks, or I don't like road courses, or street courses, you're going to have your own opinion about what we should be doing that might be different than what NASCAR is deciding to do. But I think that we've done a much better job in caucusing the industry.
You can say collaboration.
No, I'm not going to. It's all right. I'm hurt by you. I'm kidding. But I think it's listening to your stakeholder groups really important.
Yeah.
The most important group we have is our fan base. It just is. And if we are able to create opportunities for our fans to voice their opinion that, can then manifest itself in schedules or rules changes or whatever they may be, we'll do that. But I think we've done a much better job of also listening to our race teams and our drivers and our OEMs through OEM Council and different stakeholder groups that are represented. So we're looking at potential changes to playoffs moving forward. Well, that's an industry-wide group that's getting together to have discussions about what that looks like. Even schedule variation, both in the regular season and the postseason. All of those we are taking into consideration, which I think is a different NASCAR. I think at one point NASCAR was very much, we're going to do whatever we want to do, and you guys come to race with us, and it's our sandbox. That's it. And I'm not suggesting we don't, at the end of the day, make calls that we believe are in the best interest that might not be shared by everyone. I remember a discussion I had with one driver. I am not going to tell you who this driver is. And he called me up and he's like, well, you didn't listen to anything I had to say. And I said, well, that's not true. I said, there were 11 other people in that meeting. 11 people thought we should go in that direction, and you thought we should go in the other direction. We decided to go with what the 11 stakeholders thought we should do, not just the one driver who was thinking we should go in a different direction. And said driver said, well, that's fair.
I'm going to continue with the theme of propping up Steve Phelps, not because I hurt your feelings, because I hope to sneak in a couple of fastballs before we lose all the time with you. But in the past 5 years, when you've been president, NASCAR has revamped the schedule with a street race, international race this year in Mexico City. Rolled out a new car. You've signed $7 billion in new media rights deals. How do you top all of that now that you're commissioner? How do you keep all the momentum going? Is international expansion, is that sort of the low-hanging fruit for how you guys keep pushing it forward?
I think there's international expansion is fertile ground for us. What that looks like, it is we're studying right now. So if you consider right now we have series in Brazil, Mexico, Canada, and Europe. Is that the right model for us? Should we continue that expansion that way? Or should we think more broadly about what it's going to look like? That looks different than that. And we're exploring all of those things. And I do think, the opportunity to, partner with the stakeholder groups in what we are doing internationally, I think is a real opportunity as well, including race teams. What does that look like? I don't know. Are we exploring it? We are. There's been some discussion about, hey, is there, private capital that can come in and help us internationally? Maybe. I don't know.
So not just races, you're talking about different avenues here.
For sure.
Okay.
And I think it's, could I see a scenario where we are, potentially racing in Mexico City and somewhere else, south of the border, maybe north of the border? Maybe. There's lots of things to do in order for us to think about what that is going to look like. And it's going to require, us being very thoughtful about what those opportunities are. And then making sure that, we are communicating that appropriately to the stakeholder group at the right time. So one of the things that we have put in place as part of the new charter agreements, because the race team said they wanted to have a seat at the table, is we created, an owner advisory council made up of 3 individuals. And those 3 individuals are Justin Marks from Trackhouse, Heather Gibbs from Joe Gibbs Racing, and Brad Keselowski from RFK, representing the 3 OEMs as well. We want to make sure that they are sitting in these, kind of 3 and 5 year planning meetings about what the sport's going to look like in the future. Not what the sport's going to look like next year, but what the sport's going to look like in 2030. I thought it was important, and our ownership thought it was important that we create this and we have that kind of advisory council. It's not a voting board, but it is an important group. And I think if you think about those 3 individuals and what they represent and kind of this next generation of ownership, I think that's an important thing. That it will rotate, every couple of years. But I'm really pleased that those were the 3 individuals that the teams put on that. If I'm going to be completely honest, it would have been the three I would have chosen too, which I think bodes well. It's back to, working together.
Working together. I don't think many people would have had Brad Keselowski on their bingo card for that one, so that's interesting that you say that.
Before we wrap our time with you, Steve, I wanted to touch on just your relationship with OD. And obviously you guys work, extremely close together. And he was a part of, the announcement yesterday as well. But just kind of just how y'all's, working relationship has changed over the years, and also how you navigate, the decision making and being on, I'm sure at times the same, when you need to be on the same page, and maybe you have 2 different opinions on how to get there, and kind of what that, working, relationship is like between the 2 of you.
Yeah, well, so I've known Steve for almost 20 years. He's worked at NASCAR for 30. I think the most important thing between us is the trust that we have. And I know that sounds super cliche, but it has to be, right? Yeah. So I know that he's going to have my back, and he knows that I'm going to have his back. Do we always agree on things? Of course we don't. And I'm glad that we don't. Yeah. I want to hear his opinion. It's important to me. I'm not going to have all the answers for sure. And he's not going to have all the answers. Together, I think we're a very good team, because I think we have complementary skills. We have, kind of our approach can be different. I think that, for us, we have a common goal, and the common goal is to grow this great sport. And, I felt kind of bad yesterday. Like, I'm thrilled that we got announced together, but I felt bad that we had to share this moment in the sun, and I probably got more than he did, which is I don't think is fair. When I was made president, that was the announcement, right? He got made president, and I got made NASCAR's
of its
first-ish of its kind commissioner. I felt bad about that. I really did. He deserves his due, and he's worked hard for it. And I'm super proud of him. And, I love the relationship that we have. He is both a colleague and a friend. And I texted him on the way up here on the airplane and just thanked him for that. It's important to me, and so is he.
Okay. Forde's going to let me ask my 2 fastballs really quickly.
Sweet.
Yeah, I know you've been looking forward to this. So, California Speedway is near and dear to my heart, and I've pressed you on this before. Fontana, any sense of the future there and when NASCAR might race in Southern California again?
Wait, to my NASCAR colleagues, do you think that's a fastball? I don't think it's a fastball. Man, it'd be a spitball.
I don't think it was something they prepped you for. How about that?
Well, that's fine. I'm fine to answer the question. I think, Nate, that market, and I've said it to you before, is an important market for us. What the future of that particular facility is, I'm still unsure. Would I like to build a new facility at Fontana? I would. And I think, having, it would be a short track because we don't have room for anything else, frankly. And do I think creating a short track out there would be a cool thing for us? Yes. With that said, it's $300 million to build that facility. Is that the best use of that money? That is the big question. The cost of capital right now is still really high. So for us to just press pause right now is essentially what we're doing. Trying to be as transparent about that as possible. But yeah, I'd love to build a facility out there. When that is going to happen, or if that's going to happen, I don't have a timeline.
Okay. And you mentioned macroeconomic forces that NASCAR cannot control. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk in the news recently. I'm not getting political, but tariffs, the rising price of auto parts, obviously that affects the next-gen car. Do you have any sense on if that will impact teams in the future?
I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that question, Nate. It's something that obviously we are going to watch very closely, and I'm sure the folks 200 yards down the street are having discussions with. It's an unknown. Like, I had a conversation with Rick Hendrick, and obviously his base business is affected by the tariffs. What that looks like for him, he doesn't know. But you can bet he's monitoring it, on a daily basis. We're doing the same. And I don't know what the net effect's going to be, but I do know that we'll do, as we do all the time, like, there are competition meetings all the time with our race teams to try to determine what's happening to the race teams, how the race teams are impacted by different moves that NASCAR would make, including, all the parts and pieces of the next gen car. So we'll stay tuned on that.
Well, Steve, you said it all. Thank you so much for your time, philosophy, some spitball, fastball questions at the end that'll make some news, no doubt. Learned so many things from you, Steve. So appreciate all this time on Hauler Talk. Special episode. So fans, I hope you enjoyed it. We'll have Steve back again, maybe closer to the championship, see how, first 100 days as commissioner of its kind is going. So Steve, thank you so much for everything you do. Good luck in this new role. And thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, guys. It was a pleasure to be here.